Comenzamos el bloque informativo en Extra News.
I thank you, my friend, for your many years in this arena, defending the sanctity of every human life. And I rise this afternoon to mark this historic, life-saving anniversary. 3 years ago today, the Supreme Court corrected an egregious and tragic error and affirmed an undeniable truth that was originally affirmed in our nation's birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence. That truth is that every single person is made in the image of God, and they are thus bestowed with inestimable dignity and value. And our value is not related in any way to the color of our skin or what zip code we live in or what our talents are or what our hobbies are, our aptitudes. It's all irrelevant because our value, our intrinsic value, is given to us by our Creator. That's what the framers of this grand experiment in self-governance believed. The Dobbs decision, which moved the question of regulating abortion to the people's elected representatives, reversed 50 years of inhumane social engineering and has saved hundreds of thousands of innocent lives in the process. Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America estimates that post-Dobbs, pro-life policies have now saved more than 200,000 lives annually. That means at least 200,000 more babies every year are being given the blessing of life, the opportunity to be born. How profound that is. So on this very joyous, life-saving anniversary, we remember the more than 63 million who were never given that opportunity to live. And we vow to continue building a culture of life and advancing policies which protect the sanctity of every single human life. My friend Chris Smith, again, I salute you as the chairman of our pro-life caucus and for all your work for so many decades in this arena. And I thank you for hosting this special order hour this afternoon. I yield back.
Thank you. I want to Mr. President.
The Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come today to explain my vote yesterday for voting against the motion to proceed on this bill. Mr. President, I spent most of my career in management consulting, managing large, complex enterprise projects, multi-year, thousands of hours, a lot of complexity that take people, process, and technology to make it work. I learned a lot in that career, and I was able to go to the legislature and take that mindset as a member of the minority for 2 terms, and then we got a majority in 2010. And I found myself being the Speaker of the House. Mr. President, we were in the middle of the financial crisis. When I got sworn in January of 2011, North Carolina had a $2 billion shortfall on a $20 billion general revenue fund. And I had 6 months to balance that budget. Well, Mr. President, we did something that had not been done in North Carolina. We took the time to understand every aspect and every dollar that was being spent in government. We determined how to cut government in a way that was sustainable. We cut 12% from the university system budget. Not the rate of growth, but the actual spending. And I had some people say that it was going to be disruptive and the University of North Carolina would never be the same again. But Mr. President, we did it in a way that was instructed by the operations of the university system. And we did it in a way in concert with the chancellors. And you know what happened, Mr. President? We actually balanced the budget. We did do those cuts. And the last time I checked, the North Carolina university system is still considered one of the greatest systems in the United States of America. Why do I use that example? Because the Medicaid proposal in this bill bears no resemblance to that kind of discipline and due diligence. It has no insights into how these provider tax cuts are going to be absorbed without harming people on Medicare. And even worse, most of my colleagues do not even understand on either side of the aisle the interplay of state-directed payments and the devastating consequences of the funding flows that are going to be before us. Mr. President, here's how I figured out the impact in North Carolina. I used to be Speaker of the House, and I like the Speaker and have good relationship with the Speaker and the President Pro Tem, so I called them up. And I had my staff ask them if they would do an economic impact assessment on what this proposed bill would do to the Medicaid program in North Carolina. But I didn't want just the view of the Republican partisan staff that reports to the Speaker and the President pro tem on how they're going to absorb this bill. I decided to go to Josh Stein, the governor, and I went to his Democrat staff for Medicaid. I asked them to prepare an estimate, independent of the estimate that I had done with fiscal research. But I took a step further, Mr. President. I went to the Hospital Association. I asked 3 different independent groups, a partisan Democrat group, a partisan Republican group of experts, and a nonpartisan group of the Hospital Association to develop an impact assessment independent, not talking, not sharing, reporting to me. And what I found is the best case scenario is about a $26 billion cut. Now, we've got a delay, so it may be 2 years, it may be 1 year. All it does is make that $26 billion happen in year 1 or year 12, but the impact is the same, Mr. President, and it's indisputable. Now, when I actually presented this report that you can find on my website, I had people in the administration say, "You're all wet, you don't know what you're doing." I said, well, why don't we assemble a series of meetings? We're going to provide you our analytics. You go through it, tear it apart. I told Mehmet Oz, who I consider to be one of the most capable people in the Trump administration. He's a brilliant man, and I'd encourage my Democrat colleagues to talk to him. He knows his stuff, and he's very focused on getting efficiencies out of CMS. So we had 3 different conference calls with CMS, with Oz on the phone and on the video, and me on the video. And I said this, guys, I would love nothing more than you to prove me wrong. I would love nothing more for you to tell me it's not $26 billion or $30 billion, that it's $2.6 billion or $2 billion or $200 million. But after 3 different attempts for them to discredit our estimates, the day before yesterday, they admitted that we were right. That between the state-directed payments and the cuts scheduled in this bill, there's a reduction of state-directed payments. And then there's the reduction of the provider tax. They can't find a hole in my estimate. So what they told me is that, yeah, it's rough, but North Carolina's used the system, they're going to have to make it work. All right, so what do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore, guys? In the White House, senators advising the president are not telling him that the effect of this bill is to break a promise. And you know the last time I saw a promise broken around health care, with respect to my friends on the other side of the aisle, it's when somebody said, if you like your health care, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep it. We found out that wasn't true. That made me the 2nd Republican Speaker of the House since the Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, because we betrayed the promise to the American people. 2 years later, 3 years later, it actually made me a U.S. Senator because in 2010, it had just been proposed. And just anticipation of what was going to happen was enough to have a sea change election that swept Republicans into the majority for the 2nd time in 100 years. Now, Republicans are about to make a mistake on health care and betraying a promise. It is inescapable that this bill in its current form will betray the very promise that Donald J. Trump made in the Oval Office or in the cabinet room when I was there with finance, where he said we can go after waste, fraud, and abuse on any programs. Now, those amateurs that are advising him, not Dr. Oz, I'm talking about White House healthcare experts, refused to tell him that those instructions that were to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse all of a sudden eliminates a government program that's called the provider tax. We have morphed a legal construct that admittedly has been abused and should be eliminated into waste, fraud, and abuse. Money laundering. Read the code. Look at how long it's been there. I was Speaker of the House. I refused to do it. When I left North Carolina, I said, we're not going to do a provider tax. I left it at 2.5%. Now it's 6%. Mistake on the part of the leadership. And frankly, I know my friends are probably going to think I'm a little bit crazy here, but I actually passed a law that made it illegal to expand Medicaid. Why did I do that? Because I was convinced someday we would be here. And I would have rather found a way to get more people on Medicaid at the standard FMAP than having this 90-10 match and watching it disappear and taking away desperately needed health care. So, Mr. President, over the course of the evening, I may look for an opportunity to speak again. But I'm telling the President that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid. I love the work requirement. I love the other reforms in this bill. They are necessary, and I appreciate the leadership of the House for putting it in there. In fact, I like the work of the House so much that I wouldn't be having to do this speech if we simply started with the House mark. I've talked with my colleagues in North Carolina. I know that we can do that, and I believe that we can make sure that we do not break the promise of Donald J. Trump that he's made to the people who are on Medicaid today, Mr. President. But what we're doing, because we've got a view on an artificial deadline on July 4th that means nothing but another date and time, we could take the time to get this right if we lay down the House mark of the Medicaid bill and fix it. And I know that my friend and colleague from New Hampshire, I jumped in front of her, so I'm only going to take another minute or two. But, Mr. President, we owe it to the states to do the work to understand how these proposals affect them. How hard is that? I did it. How hard is it? How hard is it to sit down and ask the Medicaid office, ask the legislative staff, ask the Independent Hospital Association what the impact is? If there's no negative impact, what's wrong with daylight? What's wrong with actually understanding what this bill does? Mr. President, I know what it does because I spent a career implementing complex systems, and then I had the privilege of being Speaker of the House, and I implemented them in a government setting. And since I've been here, I've focused on bills and watched their implementation from the cradle until they're fully implemented. Mr. President, we owe it to the American people, and I owe it to the people of North Carolina to withhold my affirmative vote until it's demonstrated to me that we've done our homework. We're going to make sure that we fulfill the promise, and then I can feel good about a bill that I'm willing to vote for. But until that time, I will be withholding my vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent that the following appear separately in the record.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations in block, calendar 198 through 249, with the exception of calendar 241, and all nominations on the Secretary's desk with the exception of PM 89. That the nominations be confirmed en bloc, the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. That no further motions be in order to any of the nominations, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, also ask just for indulgence for one more minute. I ask unanimous consent that this also the following appear separately in the record.
Without objection.
This is really easy, Mr. President. Yesterday was my 38th wedding anniversary. I've convinced Susan Tillis to stay married to me for 38 years. I wish I was going to be with her and a couple of dozen family members down at the beach, but I'm doing my work here and I'm going to stay until it's done. I also want to wish my grandson that they're celebrating his 2nd birthday today down there at that same beach house. God bless my family. I love you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have before us today a once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver legislation to create a safer, stronger, and more prosperous America. With one bill, we can deliver on a number of priorities. Tax relief for hardworking Americans, economic growth, a stronger national defense, a more secure border, a more reliable energy supply, and reductions in waste, fraud, and abuse across the federal government. Mr. President, we seldom have an opportunity to take the kind of action that we're planning to take on just one of these priorities, let alone all of them. When was the last time we considered legislation like this to give a $150 billion boost to our defense spending? Any serious declines in our military readiness, I should say after serious declines in our military readiness, we are on the verge of notable investment in a number of critical military priorities: shipbuilding, missile defense, defense manufacturing capacity, critical munitions, drones and counter-drone technology, an expanded Air Force fighter fleet, nuclear modernization, U.S. infrastructure in the Pacific, and more. And while it's no substitute for robust yearly defense funding, our bill represents a real chance to start to turn our readiness deficiencies around. There is no time, Mr. President, in which we can afford to let our military readiness slide. But above all, at this time of increased global instability, it is especially vital that we ensure that our military has the resources it needs to deter our enemies and defend our country. So just by itself, the National Defense section of our reconciliation bill represents a historic opportunity. And that's just one section of the bill. We're also looking at historic investment in border security, $160 billion. Yeah, that's right, $160 billion to undo the damage done by the Biden border crisis and secure our border for the long term. More Border Patrol agents, more immigration and customs enforcement agents, funding to complete the border wall and implement critical border technology. Mr. President, it's all there. We have the opportunity to take the gains the Trump administration has made in securing our border and deporting criminals and make that progress permanent. Like the defense section, the border security provisions of this bill would be an impressive and historic piece of legislation all on their own. But again, they're just one section. We're also looking at the chance to increase our energy independence, making us safer and more prosperous. And we're looking at an exceedingly rare opportunity to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, including the first real entitlement reform in decades. Reform that will put these programs on a more sustainable path for today's recipients and for tomorrow's. Once again, impressive opportunities all on their own. But even more incredible when you consider that we're looking at the prospect of being able to do all of these things in one bill. And then, of course, Mr. President, there's the tax relief. Talk about a section of the bill that would be an achievement all on its own. We're looking at the opportunity to make the 2017 tax relief permanent. That means permanently extending the lower tax rates, permanently extending the increased standard deduction, and not only permanently extending the enhanced child tax credit, but enhancing it even further to $2,200 per child and linking it to inflation so its value will never go down. But not just that. There's more. We're eliminating taxes on tips for millions of tip workers. We're eliminating taxes on overtime for millions of hourly workers. We're putting in place an auto loan interest deductible when you buy a new car manufactured here in the United States. And we're increasing the standard deduction for millions of low and middle income seniors, making their retirement a little easier and more prosperous. We're also implementing a program to create savings accounts for newborns with an initial deposit of $1,000 to help parents save and invest for their children's future needs. And Mr. President, that's still not all. We're also looking at the chance to grow our economy by making the rest of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act business tax relief permanent. That means lower effective rates for small and medium-sized businesses. The job-creating 199A small business deduction, and full expensing for new equipment and for domestic research and development. And we're adding to the 2017 tax relief with new pro-growth provisions, like a provision to boost domestic manufacturing by implementing full expensing for new factories and factory improvements. Thanks to the pro-growth provisions in our legislation, we can expect to see GDP as much as 4.9% higher as a result of our bill. And that, of course, Mr. President, means more jobs and opportunities and better wages for hardworking Americans. Mr. President, Republicans made some promises to the American people last November. We promised to grow our economy, to extend the 2017 tax relief and prevent a $4 trillion tax hike on the American people, to secure our border and enhance the safety of our communities, to unleash American energy. We made those promises, and the American people elected us to office. Now they expect us to deliver. The opportunity is before us to deliver on our promises and make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. 53 members will never agree on every detail of legislation. Let's face it. But Republicans are united in our commitment to what we're doing in this bill: securing our border, strengthening our national defense, growing our economy, unleashing American energy, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, and preventing tax hikes on hardworking Americans. Mr. President, it's time to get this legislation across the finish line. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the oops, sorry. I always knew that. Mr. President, I understand that there's a bill at the desk that is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the bill for the title of the bill for a second time.
H.R. 1, an act to provide for reconciliation pursuant to Title II of H-Con Res 14.
Mr. President, in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding.
Objection having been heard, the bill be placed on the calendar.
Thank you. Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Muy pronto, vuelve a escuchar las noticias más relevantes en este canal de noticias.